Good morning, everyone. Yes, thank you for joining the sixth meeting of the Green Economy Network. As Carrie mentioned, we tried to come up with something a little bit more lively to highlight and kick off Earth Month, so hopefully folks enjoyed the little music. My name is Adrian Paling. I'm the manager of work solutions for JobsFirstNYC. I'm going to quickly get us started by going over some Zoom norms. All the Zoom norms are listed. I'm just going to cover a few. First, please note that this meeting is being recorded. So if folks do miss anything or want to reference back to it, we will be sharing a video of the meeting itself. We want to also ask that participants mute themselves. So when not speaking, please mute yourself just to minimize any extra noise or distractions that may occur. If folks do have a question throughout the meeting, please utilize the chat function and input your questions. We will have staff monitoring the chat function, the chat to answer any questions that may arise. And lastly, if folks do experience any technical issues, please email Ms. Jessie Conway Pierce at jpierce@jobsnyc.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. And thank you all for being here today. It is an exciting day, and I think that we could have no better stage setting for today's meeting than President Biden's new plan. Yesterday was a momentous day with the announcement of President Biden's $2 trillion American jobs plan. Roman, if you could go to the next slide, please. This plan includes $100 billion in workforce training that will prioritize communities hit hardest by the pandemic. It will prioritize sector-based partnerships like this Green Economy Network as the mechanism through which workforce investments can best reach targeted communities and populations. The plan calls for rebuilding American infrastructure and creating jobs. It provides $115 billion for repairing 10,000 bridges, for modernizing highways, 20,000 miles of highways and roads, and building 500,000 chargers for electric vehicles. It includes $100 billion for installing broadband across the country and $100 billion to strengthen our electrical grid, and provides $213 billion to build affordable housing. It will increase support of social services, secure US supply chains, and train American workers for jobs in the new economy, while protecting their right to organize. The plan addresses climate change and long-standing racial injustice. It invests in technology to address the climate crisis and put the US at the forefront of clean energy technology and jobs. Next slide, please. A recent Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce report reported that a $1.5 trillion plan, so less than what we're getting, would create 15 million infrastructure jobs. It would create 2 million jobs in our region, and an overall 8 million jobs for workers with a high school diploma or less. 4.8 million jobs for workers with more than a high school diploma. Next slide, please. The infrastructure jobs will require varying levels of training, and 75% of the jobs nationally will be for workers with no more than a high school diploma and some non-degree short-term training. Next slide, please. A majority of the infrastructure jobs will be in transportation, material moving occupations, and construction. Next slide, please. So before I get to where we've been and what we usually do, how we start these meetings off, I just wanted to share all of that because I feel our Green Economy Network could have no greater call to action than President Biden's plan that is even more robust than what the Georgetown University report was reporting those job numbers on. The plan is even larger than what they were estimating against. And it is our call to action to be ready. So where we've been as a network, those of you who volunteered to plan young adults and employer focus groups, my colleague Adrian, who was on just before me, has reached out to you, and thank you for committing to help plan those. I know there's a meeting tomorrow to start planning for an employer focus group. And if there are folks that are on this meeting today on this Zoom that are interested and did not have an opportunity to volunteer, please put your email in chat and Adrian will reach out to you. In our last meeting, we heard from Ross Gould, the Vice President for Supply Chain Development for Business Network for Offshore Wind. And his main takeaway was that we are about to experience a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, underscored by the plan. That he stated that we are at the precipice of significant growth, including short-term construction jobs and long-term jobs, professional building and construction trades, crafts production, and that applying familiar skills with new and emerging technologies would be key. And this is a tremendous opportunity for us to create high-road jobs with family-sustaining wages. And he also described the size and scope of the offshore wind industry at 3 to 5 billion. I'm going to skip over some of the other things that we'll talk about in our next meeting. Next slide, please. That's a lot to look at, and it's in our public folder, and you can look at it yourself there. So next slide, please. So today, in just a moment, you are going to hear from Bracken Hendricks, the Urban Ingenuity CEO, Evergreen Action co-founder, and Roosevelt Institute fellow, and champion for equity in the green economy. Bracken will be followed by Michaela Crater, Executive Director of the Manufacturing and Industrial Innovation Council at the New York City Small Business Services. And finally, we will hear from Council Member Costa Costanides, the Environmental Protection Chair. He will reflect on some legislative wins and looking to future opportunities. And finally, my colleague Adrian will review a very important member survey, so please don't leave before the end. Next slide. Oh, next slide, please. So in today's meeting, I pretty much covered what we're going to learn, and in the interest of getting to our first speaker, I just want to remind you to use the chat and the raise hand functions to ask questions. And now I would like to turn it over to Elizabeth Shepard, Strategic Advisor at Green Study Force and a fierce advocate of both young adults and climate justice, working tirelessly to dismantle systems of oppression. Elizabeth, please introduce our first guest speaker.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm so happy to be with everybody today and to have the task of introducing Bracken. Bracken has worked on equity in the green economy from different angles for the past 20 years. Labor, policy, philanthropy, the private sector. Early in his career, he was founding director of the Apollo Alliance, a pioneering labor and environmental partnership to advance good jobs and energy independence. And he currently balances active policy work as a fellow at the Roosevelt Institute and co-founder of Evergreen Action, with running his company Urban Ingenuity, which works on the financing side of green jobs. Bracken, I cannot see you, but I know you're out there. We're delighted to have you with us to share your perspective on the federal policy moment for inclusion in the green economy, what it means for our group in New York City, spotlight some ideas that have brought the two of us together for many, many years, some recommendations, and finally to have some Q&A. So over to you.
Great. Thank you, Lisbeth. And yeah, this is really exciting to be talking to you all, and exciting to be talking today, as Carrie was suggesting. Yesterday, the President of the United States stood before the nation and said he was going to launch a $2 trillion administration-wide investment priority in clean energy, reconstruction of infrastructure, rebuilding cities, with that's with a plan that's centered on justice, people, communities at every level. When Vice President Biden ran, he ran on 4 issues, which were addressing COVID and public health, addressing the economic crisis that arose from it. And within that economic set of solutions, he centered 2 key ideas. One was addressing the scourge of racial injustice, and the other was rolling back the climate crisis. And I think it's a unique moment to have federal presidential political leadership that is bringing together the human face of injustice and an exploitative economy and systems in our economy that are rolling back standards and instead elevating the role of positive and affirmative investment in justice and community. So this is an amazing moment. I also, though, in talking about federal policy, I want to flip the discussion very fundamentally. Green jobs, clean economy, investment in climate solutions and resilience all requires local action, and it requires an empowered and mobilized and coordinated and well-organized base in community, at cities, and in states. And the policy tools that have been built in New York are exceptional. The organizing work that's going on through the Green Economy Network is exceptional. And I would like to, in this discussion, really elevate the importance of what you're building for the effectiveness of a set of national solutions. So just really quickly, I want to kind of make a couple points, and then also want to have a pretty robust Q&A and discussion to the extent that we have time for that. We're sitting on a history of a green jobs movement that is, at least decades old, which is sitting on a history of civil rights and labor organizing. And we have those tools in our toolkit today. I met Lisbeth when we were organizing over a decade ago to create something that became the Green Jobs Act. And a lot of those ideas around job training rolled into the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. A lot of successes, but we also learned, like, you can't train people unless you have markets ready to catch them, unless you have local businesses ready to create wealth and voice and power at the community level. There's also a long history. The president was talking about the history of the New Deal, the federal highway program, rural electrification. There is a history of public policy-led investment that drives capital deployment in communities. And when we talk about a green economy network, what we're talking about is managing the way those dollars flow into community to create better outcomes for people. And within that history, we know that when the federal government mobilizes its leadership, really good things can happen, transformative things can happen in the economy. We also know that without paying real attention to how this money hits the ground, bad things can also happen too. If you look at some of the history of the very, very successful original New Deal under FDR, some of the racial inequity in terms of how those dollars flowed. If you look at the highway funds, with urban renewal in the Great Society, who's at the table matters tremendously. Who is shaping the way those dollars flow and where they flow is centrally important. So this is not the federal government speaking to cities. This is about cities being centered in that justice agenda. A little bit about my background. I'm just coming off of helping to found Evergreen Action. It's a new organization. It grew out of the team that we built for Governor Jay Inslee's presidential campaign, where he sought to run as a climate candidate. About a dozen years ago, I wrote a book with Governor Inslee, then a congressman, and we tried to look at what does the clean economy mean as an affirmative goal. It's about building sectors, it's about building industries, and it's about building communities and infrastructure. So when we tried to build a national plan for clean energy investment and climate solutions, it was a really wonderful, a privilege to be able to frame a national agenda for a solutions-based, investment-based climate agenda. We looked to cities and states, and frankly, we looked to what was happening in New York around environmental justice and centering. We were the first of the campaigns to say 40% of the capital needs to flow into environmental justice and disadvantaged communities. But we were drawing on really groundbreaking work in New York and California and elsewhere, Washington State, of course, as well. So these ideas that percolated started to frame a coherent vision of a standards, investment, and justice in building a clean energy solutions agenda, rather than talking about cap and trade and making it expensive and to do polluting and bad things. The current moment is focused on making it faster, easier, and more deeply sustainable to do good and affirmative things. So the standards, investment, and justice frame is critically important. And centering justice within that, it's about setting a high bar. You know, do you have a renewable energy standard? Do you have building codes? What are you doing for new cars? Are you getting off of fossil fuels? And then are you backing it with a $2 trillion infrastructure plan, with local investment, with private and pension investments? But justice is at the core, because you need to be thinking about how these dollars play out in communities. And that's why the fabric of collaborative community-based organizing and the sort of network that you're building is central to success. So within it, in addition to the 40% commitment, there are also things like equity mapping and screening for social justice in how dollars are deployed, as well as disparate impacts, getting the EPA talking to the Office of Management and Budget to make sure that the federal government isn't driving disproportionate harm to certain communities and disproportionate benefit to others. One thing I just want to touch on quickly is the notion of a climate core. I believe there's been a little bit of conversation here, and a lot of the players are coming out of a movement for climate cores. Buried under the utility infrastructure proposal within that $2 trillion is $10 billion to create a civilian climate core. In the infrastructure plan is the notion of creating a climate core and creating service opportunities. What you're doing with a green economy network, though, is fundamental to what does that service opportunity look like. Evergreen is about to roll out next week, or very soon, together with Senator Markey, who's developing a climate core program in the Senate, a paper that looks at climate cores. But we talk about a green careers network, very similar to your green economy network. And interestingly, we drew on the experience of Green City Force and some of the lessons we were hearing there, that it is essential to fold in wraparound services and career network building to actually create long-lasting employment opportunity. That is, right now the question is not, are we going to have green jobs? There will be jobs in a clean energy economy. There will be a massive investment in jobs, but will they be long-term careers, and will they be careers for people who've been excluded historically? Will they be union jobs? Will there be opportunities for entry for non-traditional employees in construction and manufacturing jobs, women, people of color, who were not always guaranteed a seat at the table? This needs to be central to the creation of core networks. I have a few more thoughts about how this can translate into an agenda for New York City and for your work together. But I think just kind of framing that national suite of tools, the importance of New York City and your organizing, the importance of job training, job cores, and the presence of community organizing, whether it's labor, civil rights, or services to people who most need them. This agenda translates into a clear local plan. So I want to make sure we have time to dig into those pieces. So Lisbeth or Carrie, please guide me where you'd like to take the conversation.
That's awesome, Bracken. Thank you. And I know we had so much ground we want to cover, and you're cranking through. So before we turn it over to the bigger group and Q&A, I think that there was just this one point about the financing side, maybe just hitting on why the work you're doing with urban ingenuity is also a piece of this puzzle, because we're going to talk a lot about this federal piece. But I just wanted to give you the chance to speak to that before we turn it over.
So this is ultimately about private capital, as well as public investment and public spending. We're talking about a $2 trillion investment plan, but it will leverage many times that with more corporate money, with state and local dollars that are matching those federal funds, And importantly, institutional investors, pension funds, these other sorts of deep sources of capital, many of whom have a mission-based mandate. You see, environmental, social, and governance goals that are shaping where corporations are pledging to put their dollars. Those social equity goals are often the hardest to meet for big companies, tech companies, these banks. They're pledging globally that they're going to hit these ESG commitments. They need opportunities to invest in real jobs for frontline communities, communities of color, for investment that's providing access to living wage, union jobs. Those opportunities need to be from the bottom up. One of the things, as you guys think about networks for skills, for job training, for organizing employers, I would encourage you to go upstream and look at projects and how are these projects getting created and what standards for job quality or local training are getting applied, because that's where the pipeline of work really comes. And if you think about the role that a pension fund can play in really leveraging these federal dollars to unlock trillions more, you see incredible work about creating community benefits agreements, standards for project labor agreements tied to the expenditure of these public resources, matched by the expenditure of deferred wages of workers through pension funds. So at Urban Ingenuity, what we're trying to do, we're a mission-based business, and we're trying to unpack solar and microgrid project development models and free up money for job training, for worker reinvestment, or even just straight through flowing capital back to faith-based institutions, affordable housing nonprofits, so that each clean energy project is creating dedicated flows back to people, to an organized workforce, and to local empowerment and voice. And it's a tremendously exciting opportunity, not just with federal policy, not just with local policy, but in these better structured local markets for labor, for capital, for real estate, that we can all create together in New York and nationally.
Thank you so much. So I want to invite everybody to, drop questions into the chat. And while we're waiting, I'm going to just pursue my own questions, Bracken. So I was asking you yesterday, I think, just what is the time frame? Like these gazillions of dollars coming down, what should we be expecting? So I hear the message on we're on the right track with the, the organizing across different kinds of groups here, et cetera. But what is the time frame for all of this to actually hit the ground?
So in my sort of opening, I was talking about we have a history, but there's also a lot that's different today. This is a moment where there's a challenge to actually do this work. The next 10 years is a diminishing window to act on climate. The immediate moment is also a moment when we urgently need to reinvest in people in this COVID crisis. This is a very, very different moment in terms of the scale of the opportunity. So I think we need to think about what is we need to kind of come together as communities. This is not scarce resources where we're fighting over scraps. This is trillions of dollars flowing into the economy being levered. We need each other, we need collaboration, and we need to move together to build solutions. So that's an important difference, but we can look back to the Recovery and Reinvestment Act era. In 2009, there was a big focus on shovel-ready projects, existing programs like conservation, like block grants to communities, weatherization assistance. And there was basically a 6 to 9 months of ramp up, and then a kind of a push to spend it all down in 24 months. When you kind of put it all together, getting legislation passed, maybe late spring in the summer, mobilizing all of these federal agencies, but also mobilizing community-based coalitions, you're really kind of looking at a couple years till the next midterm when there's a huge pressure to show results. And really it becomes a first-term agenda to spend this money down over 4 years. But the reason I started with what's different today and the scale of the opportunity, under ERA, there was great excitement that there was an $800 billion package and $90 billion of that was for clean economy assets. Today, we're talking about a $2 trillion infrastructure package inside a multi-trillion-dollar investment package. So, the success comes with challenges. And so figuring out how to deploy in the next 6 months, the next year, the next 2 years, has to focus all of our minds and our organizing and our energy and our capacity.
Great. We've got a couple questions, and I see Betta Broad raised her hand. So let me just give the questions, the 2 questions that we have, and then we can go over to you, Betta. So Gaspar asked, Gaspar has seen that climate change advocates are dissatisfied with the bill and asks what the shortcomings are. We probably don't have enough time for all of the shortcomings, but if you can highlight. And Marjorie is asking if you can share more about the $10 billion climate core, and then we can go over to you, Betta, after that.
Great.
And we have about 8 minutes.
Perfect. Let me just spend a minute or two on climate justice and making sure that there's accountability to the community. It's critically important. And clearly there's been a number of hours since it dropped. So really digging in is critically important. I would say, absolutely, there's a number of things that need to be bigger. I mean, a central promise that the Biden administration made was this 40% of all clean energy investment flowing to, term of art is disadvantaged communities, but frontline communities, communities that have been historically excluded, and communities where there is active environmental injustice underway. Figuring out what that 40% means and how it's parsed. Is it focused on the benefits that are leveraged, or is it focused on the actual dollars? What are the mechanisms to create accountability and to really drive the way those dollars are spent is critically important. There's a whole set of things that are flowing in terms of how other infrastructure investments work and where the dollars really spend. I mean, one thing that I personally noticed was the investment in public and affordable housing. $40 billion flowing into public housing is hugely important. The Green New Deal for public housing calls for 180 billion over 10 years. So there's a question of the scale and the magnitude. Within the wider critique of many of the green investment solutions, there's of course a deep concern around issues of market-based mechanisms and tradable permits and these sorts of things, cap and trade-based solutions that can lead to concentrations and hotspots in particular communities, often communities of color, often low-income communities, often urban centers, although often disenfranchised rural communities as well. So there's a lot to keep an eye on for environmental injustice. I do want to say one more thing and then kick it back. There is also, I do believe that there is real listening going on. Also this week was impaneled a White House Environmental Justice Advisory Commission, which is an incredible group of frontline people with deep history, who have now met for the first time, and they are guiding the flow of these funds and the investment here. So I think there's an opportunity in an open listening ear, but there's the need to organize, mobilize, and pressure, and absolutely this needs to be done accountably.
Okay, great. And then very briefly on the climate core, although it's my favorite topic, briefly, and then so we can fit in the last.
So the climate core, and the main thing that I would say, and this relates also to the Evergreen Action paper that's rolling out, a climate core it was framed as conservation and resilience. I think there's a lot of competing pieces under AmeriCorps, under various service programs. There's a resilience core. There's a lot of building blocks within the federal government and ways to stitch them together. A lot of the focus has moved towards like lands-based programs that look like the Civilian Conservation Corps, Department of Interior programs. They're very important. And there's a great core network that can flow many of these dollars down to the ground. I think that many of the programs who are part of this coalition can be part of what that means in cities for retrofitting buildings, for creating pathways for returning ex-offenders, re-entering the job market, for women and communities of color entering into construction jobs. These are huge opportunities for good paying wages. And I really am excited by focusing on a career-based long-term service delivery and the types of networks that you guys can catalyze here in New York. And I'm hopeful that as there's accountability to the federal government, there will also be elevation of networks like yours within this national narrative about what reinvestment needs to look like. And it needs to look like a green economy network in the city of New York. So you are part of the national network. and the
Excellent.
national narrative.
Thank you so much. And we'll get to see, hopefully in the Evergreen proposal coming out soon, that your proposal ties the climate core together with a proposed national green careers network, so that those two things really are combined. Okay, I'm keeping to time, Carrie. Betta, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Super exciting. So great to be with you all. Question about, you were saying, and you said it very quickly, so that's why I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the importance of using like private capital money to help expand the federal money for specific projects. We've been strategizing with some advocates and folks to green SUNY and CUNY and make sure that there is like a on the job training component, if we were able to do that, with historically disadvantaged communities, and with energy efficiency, with electrification, with solar. So that kind of seems like the perfect type of project that maybe could, get some of this federal money. And I'm just wondering if you could, expand a little bit on, what we should be doing now to make sure that happens or help make that happen.
Great. No, these are
1 minute, unfortunately. You get 1 minute for this, your
Great.
favorite topic.
So again, I'll speak quickly then. Organizing and power mapping and developing an ask is critically important. In New York City, you have one of the best policy environments because of decades of deep policy work by folks like Councilmember Constantinides, who's speaking later, and many, many others, and many of you as advocates. These dollars will be leveraged. You have tools like the Economic Development Corporation, who control physical assets and physical sites. You have institutions like the Mayor's Office of Sustainability and the Office of Recovery and Resilience. You have projects that can be held to a high bar for clean energy deployment, for resilience in climate crisis, for training and employment of workers from the communities where they're situated, so that there is a real and meaningful pipeline. And importantly, you have pension assets, whether it's the comptroller of the city of New York or the New York City teachers, and public employees, a retirement system. These are dollars that can flow with an ask. When I was early in my own work, working with AFL-CIO and working with community organizers to figure out a jobs-based, investment-based climate agenda that could bring together new coalitions, the things we looked to first were community benefits agreements, were project labor agreements, were tools for embedding a vision for the economy, a justice-based, human-centered vision for an ecologically grounded clean energy economy. And we can build those into our contracts, into our projects, into solicitation and procurement, into training tools, into our labor markets, our capital markets, and our real estate markets, so that the process of investing in building, which we all know happens at the community level, actually implements the climate solutions, and it implements a humane and empowered local economy at the same time through the same dollars. So, I mean, I think you're asking the right questions, Betta, and I would hope that in your next steps in meeting number 7, that you all come back and you all roll up your sleeves and you build a plan for New York City that showcases this network, so that the federal government cannot recreate the tragedies of urban renewal, but can build the green, just, empowered economy that we've all dedicated decades to. So, I would love to work with you in this labor of love, and I'm really excited to see what you guys produce.
Thank you so much, Bracken, and thank you, everybody. We didn't get to all of the questions. I know you have to go, but if you have a few minutes to respond, Andrea has a question here, and I do want to underscore Tanya's point. You mentioned earlier the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. Peggy Shepard's on that committee, and I saw Charles Calloway of WEAC joined us. So we have a lot to look forward to, a lot to look back to, and really, really to build on. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
And in this moment of silence, I'll just say thanks, and I will hover and enter things into the the chat for sure.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Elizabeth, did you want to introduce Kathleen?
Oh, I'm sorry. And over to Kathleen to bring in our next speaker.
Hi all, I'm Kathleen Culhane, President at NEW, Nontraditional Employment for Women. And today it's my pleasure to introduce Michaela Crater, our next speaker. Michaela is now the Executive Director for Manufacturing and Industrial Innovation Council at SBS. And Michaela, to mention just a few highlights, was formerly the Executive Director at Sustainable South Bronx. Michaela also spent 5 years at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and since 2017 has overseen the city's strategy regarding the manufacturing workforce. A number of us have worked with Michaela for a number of years, and it's a pleasure, Michaela, to have you with us today.
Thanks. I'm very excited to be here. I feel like in a way it's come full circle. And so it's frankly a deep honor to be among old friends and some new ones, hopefully, and really support the work that you all are doing from the perch that I'm allowed to be on. So I'll go ahead and get started. I think part of the reason I was invited today is, aside from having a chance to get to know all of you, a lot of the work we've been doing through this industry partnership, which we refer to as MAKE for short, is evolving its agenda and expanding it to incorporate many of the green economy specific sectors that fall in the lane of industrial businesses. So that would include some of the types of construction companies that are doing work in the green economy. It would include renewable energies that are clearly energy generation, but would fall into the world of sort of utility space or energy creation. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go over a few key highlights about what we are, what the priorities of the city's green economy are, and then lastly, sort of touch on the key challenges to transition in industry, and an industry that in many ways, for many of the neighborhoods that even Bracken touched on, have been sort of, in many regards, mistreated by industry, whether at the time historically the laws were just not sufficient, or in the wake of business exodus in New York City in particular, what lay in the wake, unfortunately, were not good for the communities in many, many, many levels. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those challenges because one of the interesting elements that I've learned since really deeply working with manufacturers and the full family of industrial players is that there are many, if you will, aligned interests. We just don't always have the common language to talk about it. So we can go next slide. First on what is MAKE. Before I get in, you can go to the next slide. Before I get into the deep weeds of how we're structured, I want to just highlight, just as a grounding point, why would we even care in New York City about industrial businesses? Why is this set of sectors important to the city as a whole? Essentially, whether we love it or not, they're very essential to the functioning of our city, both between servicing our water and sewer, to handling our garbage or waste, to keeping the lights on and bringing us goods. Another component is the fact that these jobs are actually still substantial, and they're ones that again represent opportunities for our communities to have for job connection and a growth into the middle class. Also, these wages tend to be higher. These companies are also a component of innovation. So when we think about opportunities to create new technologies and new resources to address the climate change, a lot of the production of these new devices, of these new systems can be made locally. And if we're not engaging with our New York City companies, we really lost out another opportunity to grow jobs here. So we really want to best position industrial companies to be part of that change, but part of the challenge is getting them to a new place. And also in the sense of automation, this is a tricky one, to say the least. But what we found is a lot of the jobs that are created through automation, they're not necessarily always taking away jobs. Certainly jobs change and transition, but our goal is to position the individuals whose position might have been eliminated with new job training and upskilling so that they can get new opportunities. What's really critical there is we've had the opportunity to work with some of our partners and business members, and they're really at the forefront of trying to think of the upskilling opportunities for people who might have been in the sort of low skilled roles, but to higher skilled roles with higher pay, higher benefits. So ultimately, by working together with this transition, we're in a better position to help all the individuals, but also with jobs, but also position them for opportunities to improve the industry in the full totality. Next slide. How we're organized is quite unique. So many of you probably are familiar with SBS, whether you've worked with one of our workforce centers in terms of connecting your graduates to a job opportunity, or whether you receive funding from us or through the city council through us. The way my team works is we work directly with businesses. They are what we refer to as our members. We have an executive board of about 18 different business leaders, and they basically serve, and certain individuals serve as chairs for what we refer to as our advisory committees. We organize ourselves around 3 themes, policy being one, technology and talent. You can go to the next slide. The reason we structured it this way is we have really keen ways we see problems in those 3 buckets. And we ultimately see the largest problem being the fact that this industry, because it's, we like at the city level, like to put it under the big umbrella of industrial, there's a big thing about the fact that there as individuals, not always realizing that by much of what you all are doing, frankly, by bonding together and joining their voices together, they're able to amplify their needs as an industry in a way that makes them more powerful than staying in their own particular business location, limiting their voice. So we're trying to activate that, and by sharing that they have common needs, that positions them just like what you are doing in a way to activate the voice where it's more heard by the city, more heard by policymakers, and making this the challenge that they face as an individual business more pronounced, because it's not a single problem, it's actually multiplied. So we really are focused on bringing those companies together to build, to support an ecosystem to help address the changing needs in the labor market, as well as the business environment. So the 3, again, organized committees is, focusing on talent, how to upskill talent, how to create reliable talent pipelines, how to make sure those pipelines are what the businesses have been seeking for, in some cases, maybe even going beyond that if possible. On technology and innovation, this really falls into the space of, as we all have witnessed with different innovations in our own time, making old products moot. How do we make sure our companies are ahead of the curve when it comes to this technology, so those jobs are not completely eliminated, but rather they are able to be agile and repositioned with technology change? And then lastly, on policy and regulation, how do we make sure that companies are not standing flat-footed when it comes to change? How do we best position them for opportunities, as you might not be surprised by? Oftentimes our companies are not even aware that there's programs that they would qualify for to switch out, for example, their fleets. They didn't know or were not made aware, or just, they're running their company, they're not scanning what's available to them, that there's opportunities and programs to help offset some of their environmental impact by greening their fleets, as an example. Next slide. So when it comes to the actual work, so I described a little bit how we're organized. Here are some highlights of some specific ways we're working today. I've pointed out some of the ways, again, we're expanding our agenda by inviting more companies that might consider themselves not necessarily industrial, but very much green. And that's part of the fun challenge ahead of us, is how do you make them understand that they're part of this larger tribe and community. On our training side, for example, I'll get more into the weeds of this a little bit later in the conversation, but looking at our training programs, we try to connect individuals. We've developed an apprenticeship program with industry to understand what they needed. We've run about 5 or 6 cohorts of that. We've clearly paused it. That's an example of something we've done where we worked with industry to understand what their needs are and found a way to facilitate and overcome the pain points. On DEI, we recently worked with our businesses to develop an assessment to understand what their DEI practices were and are, and what they would like to do. And then we're using that to deliver a couple of new initiatives on training for company leaders. On increasing awareness, this is a huge bucket of a lot of our work. And essentially there, we do a lot of things, whether we're just raising awareness to other programs and other training programs, making awareness on the policy, as I mentioned earlier, and then even technologies. On strengthening local supply chain, this again is a great opportunity we see as making sure folks are aware of both the city's policies as it relates for demand and interest in new products that are in the kind of clean tech or more environmental climate responsive category. And then on the other side, it's this tech roadmap. Next slide.
And Michaela, I got the 5-minute to question.
Yep, I see it. I see it. So I'm going to go ahead and skip over this slide, go to the next one real quick. One of the ways I just want to highlight, we realize that when it comes to a talent pipeline, one of the biggest challenges are, is the fact that a lot of young people just don't know about these jobs. So we recently launched what we call an Inside Industrial. And we're trying to create awareness by some of our high school students, and we're collaborating with CTE to do an ongoing series of Inside Industrial. We're featuring a couple companies in each session where they can talk about what they do, also feature a few employees who work at the facility to talk more specifically what they do in their job, how they got there, how they've grown there, things like that. Next slide. So we can switch to the next slide. In terms of the priorities of our city's economy, I'm sure you're all familiar to some degree with this lovely list of programs and legislation that the city has passed. Next slide. In terms of what my team and what we're going to be working on specifically and how we're going to look to partner with our fellow agencies. And really, this is, good practice, right? Is in terms of how do we take advantage of these policy efforts to leverage them? And so our goal for going forward is really looking at the city's investment to green itself as a catalyst to serve these larger needs. This very much sort of aligns with what some of the words Bracken shared. Our role as an industry partnership is going to be trying to coordinate the various efforts among many different players in our city's work. I noticed a few folks from NYCHA as well as Mayor's Office of Sustainability, EDC. We're all doing different things. We need to stay coordinated in that. And just the goal is there is just to make sure we're communicating out to all the different groups what ways to plug in. We'll also be trying to make sure we increase access of opportunity. A big thing here is creating a pipeline of talent that fits the needs of where the city's investing or where the policies we've created are creating new direct jobs opportunities. And then we're really honing in on making sure MWBs have frontline access to this new investment. Our team at SBS is working really steadfast at looking at green procurements, looking at some of the things that a variety of agencies are doing to invest and become more resilient in some of their projects, and making sure MWBs are aware of this so they're not standing flat-footed, and also looking to assess their capacity needs so that they can respond to those new RFPs and procurement opportunities. And then obviously all this work very much is tied to hard-hit neighborhoods. Next slide. In terms of the key challenges, we can just go ahead and skip this entire slide. I'll just highlight it as I talk about the next piece. No matter what we do here and creating these opportunities, the biggest problem as a highlight is land use, followed by talent, which I'm going to focus on right now. And then lastly, technology. I've talked a little bit about technology in terms of it's changing, and if companies and their employees are not prepared for it, those companies will suffer and many of them may not survive. Think of our taxi industry and how flat-footed they were when it came to Uber. I'm not saying I support some of that, but I'm just letting you know that industries are going to feel the pressure on technology. And if they're not figuring out what is best for them and folding that into their business model, they're not necessarily going to be in a great place going forward. So that's something to just keep in mind when we think of broader pressures beyond just the talent needs. We have to solve for that. And then also just space. There's always a continuous challenge of, is there a place for me to afford as a business to grow and have my employees? And if I can't afford it, then I can't stay in New York. So we can't, part of the make fall of effort is like thinking systematically about all these larger problems, but talent again is one of the core ones. When we think about talent as it relates to the greening of the economy and this opportunity to transition old industrial or even grow new green climate tech businesses, one of the biggest elements that I'm sure many of you know is that these jobs are not always new jobs. And in some cases, a lot of these existing workers will just be upskilled and their jobs will be redefined. But that said, a lot of these industries, they're going to be, they're already facing talent shortages. Many of the individuals within them are retiring in the next 5+ years. And there's also this general lack of interest in this type of work. So if we don't solve the attractiveness of the industry and really focus on how to pull people into the type of work that's happening, we're still going to have a problem. The other component in terms of what we're trying to do in our work is really how do we leverage and launch new trainings as needed to fill the demand as we get a better sense of that? How do we support existing on-the-job training programs or even ensure that there's shorthand, hands-on training opportunities? And then lastly, again, we're looking to zero in on those industries that are transitioning to facilitate that transition, but also to make sure that groups like those on this call are in a best position to be part of that transition, meaning that you've developed the right curriculum that industry wants, but also includes the components on the climate responsiveness that industry is going to need, even though they may not think of it right now. And that's part of the larger rub that we'll get into. Next slide. Oh, this is perfect. In terms of, again, this is probably not new to any of you on this call, but it bears repeating. All sectors, when they complain about what they don't hear or find in their workers, are very basic. And to the extent that anyone has a program that makes sure you really hone on these things, all the better. The biggest challenge for individuals facing career growth roadblocks is a lot of this work readiness and just this place of what is it, how do I handle conflict on the job? How do I handle myself when I'm getting feedback that sounds very negative? How do I handle this additional adversity in a workplace setting that individuals are my supervisors that I don't necessarily want to deal with? So these are really, really challenging elements that to the extent your training programs facilitate those real work situations, all the better. Other components that, again, the industry has listed out time and time again, I've listed here. But then, you need to add the deeper sprinkle, the sprinkle being what is your program targeted as it relates to the specific industry you're partnering with. So if you're working on the HVAC side of construction and contracting work, make sure you know what that contractor is looking for in terms of what equipment they use on a regular basis. All those equipment providers are referred to as the original equipment manufacturer. There's typically a certification they require. So again, some of the real challenges there is making sure you know what certifications. And then lastly, companies are still companies and they require relationship building. Again, nothing new to you all, but it bears repeating because even with many relationships I've had the opportunity to connect with in the manufacturing industrial community, they still annoyingly surprise me with things that I thought we'd covered. And so that deep patience is going to be a real critical element in the work. So I'll pause here. I'm done here. Sorry.
You're great. You're great. Thank you, Michaela. And it resonates. I'll speak for the whole group here. It resonates deeply with us in terms of what employers need, what we need to do in training. It resonates deeply with us at Nontraditional Employment for Women. And so with the first question from Mike Conway, and it was a question from others as well, is about that reliability. And so what are the skills, what are the credentials, driver's licenses come up in the chat that candidates need to have? Who's that reliable talent?
Yeah, so in terms of that reliable talent, I mean, this is the beyond quandary that, I mean, if we all knew the answer, and I mean, we would all not be working in this industry, right? We would not be doing this work. And I think, honestly, it's similar to what I recently listened or read about, and I have 2 young kids. If we had a special recipe of how we'd raise children, why would, then we wouldn't need all these parenting books, right? And frankly, most of those parenting books are kind of not always accurate because every child's different. We are all different too. And so the real, I think, recipe is how do you, in your training situation, create and mimic what a workplace situation is. So the way we try to do that with our apprenticeship, we talked to our employers and asked and really got under the hood about what a day-to-day would look like. And we tried to replicate that. We actually had someone who worked on the floor as part of our curriculum instructor. So if you don't have that opportunity, whatever degree, I heard there might be an employer roundtable, dig into what a typical day looks like. What we learned some of the most interesting anecdotes about like how well the person puts the tool back. You would think that should not matter. It matters. It also, they talked about like, if they don't put the tool back, the next time somebody else needs that same tool and they can't find it, that's like X hours lost in production. Like that to that manager, to that employee really matters. So really it is about as much as you can get into those details with the target employers, depending on what your program's aiming towards. And if we're talking about entry-level talent, one of the things I really understood is I was like, what is the biggest frustration of pain that you have when you have someone you're saying you're going to train on the job? What is the thing that makes them not work out? What is the thing that, if we could solve a certain level of problems in that the first 2 weeks, first month, what would they be? Yeah. So that they could at least get to the next month, that you're willing to put extra time. The other component, and again, this goes to partly why we're doing DEI, is there's got to be a leadership mindset change too. We have baby boomers who are in those leadership roles and they have a mindset that is sink or swim. They're going to either pick it up or not. And that's not how our entry-level talent is entering the job in terms of their expectations. So there has to be a meeting in the middle. And that's partly why we're working on that too. Again, if we don't solve for that, then our entry-level talent, as good as they can be, will never overcome that. So trying to facilitate both is the fun work. And I'm very excited to work in this space because it has deep meaning to me. And at the end of the day, like, the more we in our role can equip you all with what you need and then continue to work on our employers and engage them, and create better feedback loops, all the better. But it's not to say I don't have the answer yet. We're still working on it, right. But I'm overly transparent sometimes.
We like that. And it leads to my last question, and then hopefully you can answer more in the chat, which is what approaches or leverage points, right, can CBOs like ours use to encourage employers to hire more of our candidates?
Well, hopefully soon there'll be more resources, and I know I haven't got a chance to dig into this. I've got the opportunity in working with senior leadership in City Hall on what will be a climate core. Some of the things that Bracken mentioned earlier are exactly, good news is we're aligned. We want to think about this as a development of an entry-level pipeline, but with real ladders, right? And I know that's what you all want too, which is these are not temporary jobs, these are long-lasting jobs. Okay. So we're trying to think through that structure and think through how do we opt in groups like yourself so that we don't have to like create a citywide, you just are part of this larger city vision. That is the ideal. And so in that space, what is the key thing is going back to what are those fundamentals of like the wraparound services, and like what is it that employers would say, I want to hire that no matter if it's green or not green, like I need some of that in terms of a skill, experience, hands-on. The more this job climate core can mimic what would be typically that on-the-job training apprenticeship, like build up, the better. The other key part is that career ladder. And then it's not just letting them get that first rung by like getting out of the core to like getting their first job. It's like, what should happen next for them and equipping them with that agency so they know but they also know like, oh wait, I'm gonna have to get more classes. I'm gonna have to get more certifications. I'm not gonna get to be CEO in 2 years. I'm gonna have to build up to that, but they have that roadmap for themselves. And that's gonna be, again, the ideal part of what we're crafting. That, again, how this all figures out, it's very fluid. I do know that our goal is to create that the mayor's 10,000 cleanup core commitment. We're gonna get a slice of that. But I think that we always expected to have something hopefully through the stimulus, and now we have to rework those things to figure that out. But again, the intention was that, and again, this goes back to what Bracken was saying earlier, we have lots of projects that we want to see happen. How do we leverage those projects so that they can be part of this network? But at the end, we have to connect the dots, and that, you know, we're good at scale. We're not good at small numbers adding up to scale. And that's the fun trouble we're going to be navigating, really, is how do we make that simpler for all of you?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not going to say we're going to get it right. We probably won't, but we're going to try. And I speak as someone who used to be sitting where you all are. And I know how often it'd be so frustrating, like, government folks, don't you know, we're just trying to get our bread and butter here. So I go in with that heart and do whatever I can, as an ally. But I mean, the good news is that we're all aligned, and we all are seeing similar systemic problems that we hope to solve.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Michaela. It's exciting to hear our alignment, and you know that we're partners in this, and we hear that you're partners with us in this as well. So we're excited for the opportunities and the many conversations to come. And we thank you for your presentation today. Continue to chat if you're able. And it is now my pleasure to ask for Tanya Gale, Executive Director of Green City Force, to introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Kathleen. And thanks, Michaela, for that great affinity allyship. We appreciate it for sure. Hi, good morning, everyone. Happy Earth Month. This is a great way to kick it off. We are taking back April Fool's Day and claiming it as the first day of Earth Month as a priority message. I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker today. Costa Constantinides is the council member for the 22nd District in Queens. And he has been walking the talk well before this moment in time where the nation and the world has been focused on environmental justice. He has been chair of the New York City Council Environmental Protection Committee since 2015. He is a phenomenal example of local leadership from his hometown in Queens. He's, as an individual and as a representative in a council, led all sorts of priorities tied to legislation and environmental justice, particularly in communities of public housing. He's been responsible for the Climate Mobilization Act, which he's going to talk a little bit about today, as well as pushing equity through Renewable Rikers work, which is part of his district, through many organizations across New York City, getting support through a Greener NYC support from his leadership. So we're just really thrilled that he's with us today. And I want to thank him for all he's done historically and at this moment, and look forward to hearing you share some thoughts about, you know, what the legislation and priorities have been in your work recently, and how you see this Green Economy Network being an important part of what's ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya, for that really generous introduction. And I wish I could be with you guys in person. Haven't seen everyone in so long. And Green City Force, I miss going to your graduations every year and celebrating with you all and the Green Economy Network. Thank you for having me here today. And I'm so excited to kick off Earth Month. You know, I am absolutely reclaiming, I'm with you on reclaiming this day, because 1 year ago today, I got my diagnosis. I had taken a COVID test because I was in the hospital last year. I found that I was COVID positive on April 1st. So I am all about reclaiming April 1st for good things like Earth Month. So glad to be with you, and so glad to celebrate Earth Month with you all. Really kind of thinking about the green economy and thinking about what we've done as a city around legislation and what we need to continue to do to provide opportunity for equity, to provide opportunity to build those good middle-class jobs of the future that everyone in this organ, every part of the Green Economy Network trains men and women every day for. There's a lot of work that we need to do. Local Law 97, as part of the Climate Mobilization Act that we passed 2 years ago, seeks to, is mandates retrofits from large buildings. And the reason we started with these large buildings, 25,000 square feet or above, even though there are only about 50,000 of them, those 50,000 buildings were responsible for about 1/3, or about 30% of New York City's emissions. So if anyone asks me, well, why are you picking on us? Why did you start here? Why didn't you start with smaller buildings? Why did you we worked Local Law 97 because that's where the emissions were. 30% of New York City's emissions came from these large buildings. Here's another really sort of interesting point. They're talking about tens of thousands of jobs being created by Local Law 97 in the retrofit program. That's why we fought so hard and will continue to fight against Part R in the state budget. Because frankly, I understand the concerns that big real estate has. And we've worked to address those concerns, right? In the legislation, it talks about the PACE program and providing loans for building owners in order to help them with, build it around their savings. We have the Office of Building Energy Emissions Performance, or OBEP. We call it OBEP because frankly, saying all that's longer than my last name and nobody wants to do that. But they provide free technical assistance to building owners. We have the Retrofit Accelerator, which I know many of you work with, to help building owners think about how they can do this. Again, free technical support. We're accelerating the building, Retrofit Accelerator. But there's also good faith written into legislation 4 times, where if you're trying hard enough and you really can't hit your number, you can go to OBEP and ask for a reduction in your number or your penalty. But to say to building, after all of those caveats, and after we've done all of that to try to make this an aggressive but achievable plan, for Albany to come in and say, even though we've had nothing to do with this legislation, right? Because we worked on this legislation for 2.5 years. It's not like I woke up one morning and just threw the desk on the table and, we just threw it on the table and said, this is it. We worked on this bill with stakeholders for 2.5 years, went through a rigorous legislative process where we heard testimony and meetings for months and years I'm never going to get back. For Albany to come in and say, we now know best, is arrogant at best and irresponsible at worst. This is a job creating bill. This is a bill that's going to spur our green economy. This is a bill that's going to reduce our emissions, the largest emissions reduction policy in the history of New York City. So my message to Albany today is really, we need to be creating green jobs. We need to be training people to work in the green sector. If you want to help us make our bill better, sit with us, but don't sort of drop down things like Part R from up on high that undermine everything. Because if Part R would have passed in the state budget, not one building will need to be retrofitted till 2030. And that doesn't put people to work. That doesn't help us in our COVID recovery and building a good green economy. That doesn't help lift people into the middle class. That doesn't do anything but put more money in the pockets of real estate developers. And that's not what we should be doing at this moment in time. So here's, I'll talk a little bit more about what else we can do. It's not just about Local 187. Renewable Rikers Island. We all know the stain that Rikers Island has been on our city's history and the horrors there. We all know about the issue of over-policing and over-incarceration in communities of color. We can make a small measure right to the same communities that are over-policed and over-incarcerated, the same communities that are power plants and pollutants. Peaker plants were placed in the Ravenswood generating plant 2 decades ago, right next to the Queensbridge houses, the Ravenswood houses, the Astoria houses, with no environmental review whatsoever. If we build renewable Rikers Island, I mean, enough power to close every peaker plant that's opened in the last 20 years. We could have enough waste. We could have a wastewater treatment plant that could deal with CSOs, combined sewer overflow. We could have anaerobic digestion. But like, here's another really important thing. It's going to put a lot of people to work. It's going to put a lot. We're going to be building an island from scratch. And I think we should be prioritizing those men and women who are impacted by Rikers, to give them the training and the opportunity to rebuild their lives and work on transforming that island into a renewable energy hub. And here's even the better part, right? If we do this right, if we get this right, and we need to get this right because 413 acres of land does not come available every day. If we get this right, the wastewater capacity on the island could help us close other wastewater treatment plants in New York City, like Bowery Bay, College Point, Hunts Point, Ward's Island. And guess what? We could be building other things where those wastewater treatment plants sit. We could have jobs for the next 2.5 decades. Rebuilding our city in and around the creation of a renewable energy hub. This could be an engine for change for a generation if we get this right. And if we just don't make this part of a airport, or we just give it away to someone else, this is our moment. And that's why we passed the Renewable Rikers Act. And I think this is, if we combine Local 197 with renewable Rikers, and of course, I think we have to solarize all of our schools. You know, as part of Local 197, I didn't let New York City off the hook. I didn't say, you know, do as I say, not as I do. I said, we're gonna do two. We have to reduce city emissions in our portfolio, you know, 40% by 2025, 50% by 2030. So on Monday, I'm having a hearing on Local Law 97 compliance, because I may be leaving the council in a week, but I'm not done yet. So we're going to have a hearing on Local 197 compliance on Monday morning to make sure that the city's doing the things and that we're walking the walk, and that we have the plan to walk the walk, and that we're going to retrofit those buildings, because guess what? That's going to put more people to work too. I would love, we're building a CTE at Long Island City High School in my district. And that building is going to go solar in a few years once they finish fixing the roof. I would love for the kids from Long Island City High School who go through that CTE to be the ones who rebuild that roof. Right? I would love there to be real connections around solarization of our schools and retrofitting of our city buildings with young people from our neighborhoods, but young people from public housing living around those neighborhoods. Long Island City High School is a stone's throw away from Queensbridge houses and Ravenswood houses and Astoria houses. So we're gonna make sure City walks the walk. And I'm just so glad to be here with you all and be able to talk about these things. And I'm not going very far, even though I'm leaving the council next week. I'm gonna be the new CEO of the Variety Boys and Girls Club of Queens. So I'm going to be, I wanted to find something that allowed me to continue service, because you can be a public servant, as you all are. You can be a public servant, but not in elective office. And I think too often people in elective office forget that. So I'm looking forward to being able to serve 4,000 kids in my community. So I hope to partner with you. I hope to continue our working together. These are relationships that I know will last a lifetime, and I'm excited for the next chapter for all of us. So with that, I'll take any questions that you have. And so thank you for having me here today.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Oh my God, we're going to miss you a lot in the council, but yes, we're definitely going to follow you. So feel free to share your MOCAR and contact information. You can help us recruit candidates for our programs for your high school. Amazing. Amazing. So that was incredible. Thank you. I have one question here from one of our folks, Gasper, which I'm gonna find, which ask the question of like, what do you see? And Jasper, you can check me if I didn't cover this properly, but like, what policies and priorities do you want to see prioritized by the incoming council members and city government going forward? What do you see as priorities that you want to push?
Okay, so if I were to be given another 8 years, which I'm not, if I were to be given another 8 years, I think the next horizon is getting us off of fossil fuel. And we've just started that process where having no new gas hookups for new buildings and new construction is a really important next step. And full electrification. And then on new buildings and major renovations, right? We're not asking, Joe Q homeowner to live about all their stuff. We're just saying new buildings, no more gas, no more oil, electrification. Secondly, I think we need to do the next frontier and something that we were thinking about, and it's really going to take a lot of thought. And I think this is going to take the federal government, right? I think we're going to have to go to the Biden administration. We're going to have to go to Chuck Schumer and say, we want to be the first city that's fully electric, that we want to be the first city that's off of fossil fuels, that retrofits all of our buildings as per the Green New Deal. We need incentives to do that. We need to be able to give 1 and 2, 3 family homeowners the dollars, the access to capital to retrofit their buildings. That could create hundreds of thousands of jobs. We could be a model for the entire country in that respect, but we're going to need help because the city's credit card doesn't go that far. So we need a little bit of help from the federal government to sort of take that next huge step and make Local 197 apply to every building in New York City. But that's going to take real money, but that's going to be a job creator that's, again, going to put people to work for the next 2 decades and is going to be a boon for our city's economy. It's going to make us greener and more sustainable. I think those are the 2 things if you have to ask me about another 8 years. And I was, so the next council, I think those are things they should be thinking about. And I think the next council also, I'll be very honest, I'm very concerned about slogans without action. I think that it's great to say you're for a Green New Deal for New York City. If one more candidate asked me for my endorsement, and I asked them, what's your plan? And they're like, we're going to do a Green New Deal for New York City. I'm like, well, what does that mean? What does that work? We're going to know a Green New Deal for New York City. That can't be a good answer, right? We need to know what the action points are. It can't just be slogans. And you have to understand Local 197 because this law is very fragile. It could die a death by 1,000 cuts. If we start doing caveats for every entity, all that's going to be left is one building in Staten Island who wasn't paying attention. So we need to make sure that we don't start slicing away pieces of Local 197. So those are the things I would say that the next council I'm concerned about, and I would think those are the next frontiers that we should be thinking about as a city.
Thank you. Well, it's good to know you have us. We have you to be checking us to make sure that everyone's accountable for what they say they're going to commit to. So walking the talk is great. Another question from Dwana is, has there been an environmental impact study of the correlation of the Rikers Island renewable project with the correlation of air traffic from LaGuardia?
An environmental impact study about the air traffic with the. So I mean, we haven't done that because I'm not sure that's necessarily needed. Here's what we do need, right? We know that what shouldn't go there, right? They can't be large buildings because it's in the flight, sort of in the flight path, right? I mean, I live not too far away from there. My son's Little League field at Elm Jack is a stone's throw away. I get to watch when I'm coaching Little League at third base. I get to watch all the airplanes go off. We know it has to be low-rise buildings, and that's really why we feel that this back office, this renewable energy space, is the best possible usage. There's also the issue of methane leaks, which the Renewable Rikers Act seeks to address, and methane capture. No one should live there. It's not something where we've seen people sue the city of New York, both men and women who were formerly detained and corrections officers who've gotten sick, and they've claimed it's due to the methane leaks. So we know that no one should live there. But there hasn't been, we're doing the renewable energy study right now. We're doing the wastewater treatment study right now. There's no one who has told me that the airport usage and the renewable energy island usage are in conflict with one another. All I've heard from every engineering firm and every entity out there, and a lot have approached me, have talked about how they can make the design better. And if that's the conversation we're having and how we can make the design better, then I think we're in the right place.
Beautiful. Well, in closing, because your passion for this mission is so palpable, like this, would love for you to close us out with just sort of like your words of inspiration to like help this economy network push forward to live up to all these things that you're testifying about as really critical for the future of New York City.
Tanya, I mean, I have the work that we've done. I couldn't have done it without all of you. This has always been a partnership. I've spent almost the last 8 years of my life every day waking up to do the best job that I could. We've passed 44 bills in the last 7 years around whether it's environmental justice, whether it's resiliency, whether it's sustainability. We've tried to move the needle, and our partnership has been invaluable. And that's why I love Green City Forest. I love the Hope program. I love everyone in the Green Economy Network, because every day you're giving people that hope and that opportunity. And I think too often, we're always finding the reasons why we can't do things. And you're every day finding the reason how to give people hope and how we can get things done. So thank you for always including me. Thank you for making me part of your family. And I'm looking forward to working with you into the future.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you. All right, you take care. Well, that was been amazing. I'm gonna pass it off now to Adrian, who's gonna wrap up with some closing comments. So over to Adrian.
Thank you, Tanya. Good morning, everyone. So we just really wanted to close out on an action item. So we created a quick Google form.
You're muted, Adrian.
Sorry, y'all. I did not realize I was on mute. I apologize for that. So thank you, Tanya. We wanted to close out this meeting with an action item. So we created a short Google form that will help us gather data on all of the programs and participants that have been involved in the Green Economy Network. So this short form will allow us to capture data on you all that would help us understand your programs, your agencies, what services you offer. If you're an employer, what type of employment opportunities you're recruiting for. This is in an effort to not only understand who our network is comprised of, but also to begin to create a resource bank of all the different services and programs that are available around the green economy that we could potentially share with you all. So it's a quick form. It should take less than a couple minutes. There is an option if you want to give us more specifics. There is an option to give more detailed information about your program and even include your current recruitment flyers. So we want to encourage folks to please fill that out. If folks have any questions about the form or have any difficulty at all, please email me directly. Thank you.
And thank you, Adrian. I want to thank Bracken and Michaela and Costa, Councilmember Castanides, for joining us today, for bringing your passion. I think it's clear there is no shortage of passion and voices in this conversation, in this fight. I am inspired. I know there's a lot to still unpack in Biden's plan. There was a comment I think Gaspar shared about some of the reaction from people in the climate justice fight having some being disappointed with some elements of it. So I don't think too many of us have had enough time to unpack and look and see what that is, but it does look like it's moving us in the right direction. I do want to make sure that you all register for the next meeting. Adrian will share the registration link. Oh, he just did in chat. The next meeting on May 6th is going to be a working meeting. This was an event. This was a celebration of, April, Earth Day month. And then the next meeting, we're really going to roll up our sleeves and get to work. As you have heard, it is our moment. We need to be organized. The network needs to be ready for all of the incoming opportunities so that it is equally shared with the communities who are most highly impacted by climate injustice and climate change. And there's in the public folder, we'll share out in a follow-up email, but in the public folder, we will share a reading that we'd like those of you who are ready to roll up your sleeves and be a part of the network, read in preparation for the next meeting. And any other requests we will put in the follow-up email. So thank you all for being here. If you do have Earth Day events that your organization is hosting, feel free to email them to Adrian or I, and we'll make sure to share them with the larger contact list of this network. Thank you, Lisbeth, Kathleen, Tanya, and all of the folks at your organizations that helped put this together. We couldn't do it, obviously, without you. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. Be well.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.